Hey everybody, it's Alderperson Andre Vasquez, 40th Ward. Just to give you a heads up, this video is going to be about 9 minutes long to explain the $830 million bond proposal that is coming before the City Council. I want to break it down for you in our latest budget video. Don't worry, I'm not driving. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people about when we did our budget 101 videos, and so I thought it would make sense to take time to talk about this $830 million bond that Mayor Johnson is proposing. I will try my best to explain it in a way that hopefully you all can understand, and absolutely feel free to ask any questions. I'm more than happy to answer. So I guess we'll start with the GO bond. It's a general obligation bond for CIP, which is capital improvement plans. So this is these are funds used to repair roads, bridges, your sewer work, water mains, as well as our menu budget. So the menu budget is a budget each ward gets. It's about $1.5 million, where each ward gets to put it towards making repairs on your curbs, your gutters, your sidewalks, resurfacing blocks where there are too many potholes. So we're talking about money to do that. Now, cities typically all bond or borrow funds to be able to pay for that kind of infrastructure repair, knowing that the cost is in the billions of dollars, and you can't cover that with 1 year's worth of budget, so you kind of spread that out. So that's what typically happens in cities all over the country, okay? And it's what's happened in Chicago, for decades now, right? When you're taking a lot of big work, you've got to kind of borrow and then pay it back. The best analogy that I can provide for you all is, for those of you who own your homes, it's like taking out a mortgage, right? You're taking out a loan, you're paying it back, knowing that the cost of something is much larger than you can afford all at once, and so you kind of make those payments going forward. So Mayor Johnson and his team are proposing an $830 million bond to pay for these kind of repairs for next year. So there's a lot of concern for a number of reasons, and so I'll address kind of the big ones. One is, as far as the borrowing, what they're looking to do is pay the interest in 2027 and not pay the principal amount until about 2045. Now, that sounds on its face a little concerning, because you're pushing it out so far ahead that one would want to pay it, more quickly up front. There's two reasons why that's being proposed. One is, we have already got bonds that we're paying back currently. And so, you've got a large amount of payment that you're making. And in 2045, that payment goes down because you're paying a lot of that off. So they're proposing to put the other debt in 2045 rather than stacking it on top of the existing debt. So, if you could imagine that, you're putting debt on top of debt you already have. So the amount you'd have to pay is much larger on the front end. So they're shifting that debt until the other debt is paid off to actually level set it. Now, the second reason you do that is because if you put the debt on top of the debt, you would have to do two things as a city government to actually make those payments. One, raise property taxes to do so. And as we've seen in the last budget cycle, the city council and the mayor's administration really didn't do the best job of figuring out a budget, which is why we got downgraded by the credit agencies, right? The other thing you could do is find efficiencies, make cuts. Both of those things are things that you have to seriously entertain when you're trying to solve a budget. Now, here's the part about efficiencies I want to make clear to folks. If you want to find real savings, you've got to be serious about what that means. And here's what I mean. You've got about $5 billion worth of discretionary funds in your budget every year, right? We call it the corporate fund. That covers about 37 different departments in the city of Chicago, along with other expenses that are part of the budget. Out of those 37 departments, we've got one department that takes up 40% of that budget. 40%, one department out of 37. So if you're serious about finding cuts and efficiencies, you've got to look at the most expensive department and work our way down. And now, what department am I talking about? The Chicago Police Department. It is a $3 billion budget on its own. When you look at the $2 billion for the department, plus the Office of Public Safety Administration, plus all the other expenses like vehicles and helicopters and everything else. That is where a large amount of the spend is. If you're looking to find savings, that's where you want to go. Now, what is the actual expense. You're talking about headcount, which, we need officers out here to do their job. You've got overtime because you've got officers doing a bunch of responsibilities that I would argue aren't their responsibility. And then you've got your misconduct settlements because we don't have proper accountability yet in the city of Chicago. So every year we're paying out more than $100 million just in misconduct settlement. So some folks will say, well, why are we settling? The reason we settle is because the Department of Law looks at these cases and says, there's enough evidence for us to lose this case. And if that occurs, we're paying more than what we would settle out for. So it's a safer bet to actually pay the settlement. The reason why I'm mentioning those things is when you look at the challenges, that you need a city council and a government that will actually vote on a property tax to raise the revenue to make payments or make the cuts that are necessary to departments that it might not be the most popular thing to make cuts on, depending on who you're talking to. When you have a city council and a government and a mayoral administration that can't do that, that is where you get downgraded, because the credit agencies look and say, you've got to do one or the other. You've got to move responsibly. Now, if you can't do either of those things and you're looking back at this bond and borrowing the funds to do necessary infrastructure to fix our roads, our sewer mains and everything else, the responsible thing would be to borrow those funds like you would a mortgage, right? That's good debt as opposed to bad debt. And then put it off in the timeline that they're proposing to make sure you're not having to make payments that are so large that you have to figure out how to raise tax or make the cuts. And that would be the challenge, both publicly, politically, as a government body. That's what is currently the challenge. Now, on top of all of this, what makes it even more difficult is that largely the public and members of the city council don't trust Mayor Johnson and his administration to make responsible decisions. We've seen that in the last year's budget process. We've seen that when we hear proposals about taking out short-term, high-interest loans to pay off a debt for CPS, as we've heard the mayor was proposing, and other decisions that cause us to be dubious, skeptical about anything that they're presenting as an administration. So the reason why I'm framing all that is multiple things can be true. The right answer can be the right answer, and a person you don't have a lot of faith in could be the one proposing it. And that's what makes it challenging. But the way we're looking at it, and I'll say me, as I'm looking through the homework and making sure I make decisions, it's still the responsible thing to do to take out the bond and really make the payments in a way that don't overwhelm our ability to pay that debt. I said a lot there, and it's 8 minutes worth of content. Any questions you have, feel free to ask them. I'm more than happy to share.